The meat lay untouched, buzzing with flies, darkening in the sun. Every hour it rotted more, but still the lion didn't move. He just lay there, muscles slack, eyes open but vacant, ribs more visible now, the slope of his back thinner than it had been days before. His name, according to the rangers, was Kumi, one of the strongest males in the territory, a lion known for his deep roar and unmatched stamina. But he hadn't made a sound in 7 days. Not since the storm. Tourists who'd once waited eagerly to catch a glimpse of Kumi now whispered in concern from their jeeps. Even the newer rangers started glancing nervously at their radios, unsure of what to report. Predators don't just stop eating, not unless they're dying, or grieving. That word, grieving, was the one Seifu wrote in his field notebook that afternoon, sitting on a rock 50 yards from Kumi's motionless form. He didn't say it aloud, he just wrote it and underlined it once. Seifu was the only one who didn't try to fix the situation. He just watched, and what he saw didn't match anything he'd learned in training. Kumi wasn't sick. His eyes were clear. He drank water once every day, slow and steady from the stream. He wasn't limping. No fresh wounds, no signs of infection. But he wouldn't eat, wouldn't rise, wouldn't leave the one spot he kept returning to. Always the same patch of land, a dusty, shaded area near the edge of the watering hole. Not under a tree, not cool, just open, exposed dirt. Every day he lay beside it, sometimes placing a single paw on the ground, claws digging into the soil like he was holding something there. Seifu watched him from sunrise to sunset, and every time Kumi blinked, every time he lowered his massive head, there was this weight in it, this unbearable quiet, the quiet of someone waiting or refusing to move on. Seifu wrote again. There is something beneath that earth. He didn't tell the others yet, didn't raise alarms. Instead, he sat longer, then his shift, until the sun dipped low and the flies stopped circling. When Kumi finally stood, just barely, he didn't stretch. He didn't stalk. He took 3 slow steps and lay back down beside the same patch of ground, his body curled toward it, as if protecting it, as if mourning it. Seifu packed his notebook, stood up quietly, and looked one last time before walking away. Whatever was buried there wasn't just holding Kumi in place. It was holding his heart, and the next day they would uncover why. Seifu didn't go home that night. He stayed near the watering hole, parked under the cover of an old acacia. No lights, no movement. Just him, a flask of water, and a camera with a long lens balanced on his lap. The others had left hours ago, tired of watching a lion who didn't do anything. One of them had muttered, "He's probably just sick. Parasites, maybe." Another suggested darting him, running tests. Seifu didn't argue. He'd seen sick lions, and this wasn't that. This was different. He watched Kumi through the lens, barely blinking. Every few minutes the lion would lift his head, sniff the wind, and return to stillness. He didn't respond to jackals in the distance. He didn't swat at the buzzing insects on his back. His world had shrunk down to a single patch of dirt, and he guarded it like something sacred. At midnight, a hyena approached from the ridge. It crept low, sniffing the carcass of the warthog the rangers had left earlier. It edged forward, eyeing the meat. Kumi stood, slow, unsteady. But when he turned, there was nothing weak in his face. He didn't roar. He didn't charge. He just stared. The hyena froze. They locked eyes for less than 10 seconds. Then the scavenger turned and slunk back into the dark. Kumi didn't return to the meat. He returned to the earth. He sat beside it, touched it again, dug at it, lightly, with his paw, then pressed his face to the ground. His mane folded over the dirt like a curtain. Seifu wrote in his notebook with hands that weren't as steady as usual. He's not protecting food. He's protecting memory. The realization stung, because if a lion like Kumi, so strong, so wild, was capable of that kind of loss, what had he lost? The sky turned gray before dawn. The wind shifted, and just before the first rays hit the horizon, Kumi did something new. He let out a sound, not a roar, not even a growl. It was low, broken, a sound no lion should ever make. It was grief, raw, unfiltered, like it had been caged in his throat all week and finally broke loose. Sefu swallowed hard and turned off his recorder. This wasn't something to document, it was something to honor. When the other rangers arrived in the morning, he didn't wait for approval. He stood over the patch of dirt Kumi had guarded and drew a line around it, with chalk. "We dig here," he said quietly. One ranger looked at him, confused. "What are we looking for?" Sefu didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "What he hasn't let go of." And somewhere behind them, Kumi lay down once again. Eyes, open, watching, waiting. They sedated Kumi just after sunrise. It wasn't easy. He didn't fight, but he didn't trust either. When the dart struck his flank, he flinched, staggered up with a groggy snarl, then collapsed beside the earth he hadn't left in days. He didn't try to run. Sefu stood over him, watching his breath rise and fall, heavy and slow. "We'll make it quick," he whispered, not knowing why he spoke as if Kumi could still hear. Then he turned to the team. "Dig here." No one asked questions. The first layer was dry, cracked soil. Easy to move, but a few inches down, the texture changed. Softer, darker. Sefu crouched, brushing back the dirt with his bare hands. And then he saw it. A tuft of fur. Golden. Still, clean despite the shallow grave. He froze. The ranger beside him let out a breath like he'd been holding it for hours. That's a lion. They dug more carefully after that. Hands instead of tools. Silent, reverent. As if any loud movement might disturb what was left. She was curled in on herself, her legs tucked beneath her body. No visible wounds, just stillness, peaceful in a way that made Sefu's chest ache. One of the younger rangers whispered, "She looks like she was placed here, not just fallen." And she was. The earth had been patted down, the edges even, not clawed apart in panic. This wasn't where she died, it was where she was laid. Sefu stood slowly, eyes never leaving her face. "I think he buried her." The words were impossible, but no one argued, because Kumi's behavior, his guarding, his mourning, his refusal to eat, made sense now. He hadn't just lost a mate. He had performed a burial, something no one expected from a lion, something no one had ever documented. A ranger snapped a photo quietly. Sefu raised a hand. No, they lowered the camera. This wasn't for the press. It wasn't for science. It was for him. Kumi lay just feet away, unconscious, his body still turned toward her even in sleep. His face slack, but not peaceful. Sefu crouched beside him and whispered again. "We found her." Kumi didn't stir, but the whole clearing seemed to pause. The trees held their breath, even the flies had moved on. Sefu stood. "We leave her," he said softly, "exactly where she is." A few rangers hesitated, but infection. "She's not rotting," Sefu cut in. He buried her deep enough, covered her well, let her rest. They refilled the dirt, gently, quietly, and when it was done, Sefu placed a single stone above it, not as a marker, as a message, that someone had loved here and someone still did. She wasn't supposed to be there. Aya appeared one dry season afternoon, crossing the edge of Kumi's territory like she didn't care who it belonged to. Most lionesses would avoid a dominant male without a pride. But she didn't avoid. She didn't flinch. She moved like she had every right to exist, alone, fierce, hungry. Kumi spotted her from the ridge. At first, he did what any male would do. Stalked low, tested her scent, watched her body language. She didn't challenge him. But she didn't submit either. She ignored him completely, hunting a warthog just inside his boundary. She failed, slipped, lost her footing in the chase. Kumi approached then, muscles coiled, ready to warn her off. But when she turned and looked at him, something shifted. She didn't growl, didn't back away. She blinked once, then sat down like she had nowhere better to be. He didn't drive her out. Instead, he walked away. That night, Sefu watched from a distance. His notes were confused. Unfamiliar lioness, no tags, no ID, not part of any known pride. Kumi allowed her to remain. No aggression. In the days that followed, they were seen more and more together, hunting in tandem, sharing kills. Not mating, at first, just existing near each other. Not dominance, not submission, companionship. The kind you can't define in animal behavior textbooks. Sefu began to call her Aya in his notes, meaning root in the old tongue, because she grounded Kumi in a way no one else had. Over time, the change in him became undeniable. Kumi grew calmer, less territorial. He stopped chasing off jackals, shared space with hyenas more than he should have. It was like something about her steadied his fire. She never stayed close like pride lionesses do. She came and went, but always returned, and when she did, Kumi was never far behind. There was a moment once that Sefu never forgot. Just before dusk, the two lions lay near the stream, side by side, Aya's head resting over Kumi's back. He didn't move. Didn't twitch. Just let her be. A ranger had whispered, "They're like soulmates." It sounded ridiculous, romanticized, but Sefu didn't correct him. Because deep down, he agreed. This wasn't dominance or survival. It was affection. Rare. Real. And then came the night everything changed. Sefu's log only had 5 words. Blood found. No sign of her. That was 3 weeks before the silence began. No body, no tracks, just a trail that ended near the brush, and Kumi changed. He searched for 2 days, slept on the same patch every night, then stopped hunting. Stopped roaring, stopped living. Without dying, he buried her with his own paws. And lay beside that place ever since. Because the bond they shared wasn't instinct. It was love. And the wild doesn't forget love. It just hides it where no one thinks to look. Until now. The night Aya vanished wasn't quiet. It began with snarls. Loud, sharp, echoing across the ridge like thunder from inside the brush. Rangers on patrol turned their heads. Sefu, already nearby, grabbed his scope and scanned the horizon. 3 males, young, lean, aggressive, had been pushing south, claiming scraps of unmarked ground. Kumi's territory was vast, well established, but with no pride to defend. It made him vulnerable. The males weren't after land. They were after power. Sefu saw Kumi first. He stood tall, mane bristling, teeth bared, roaring into the dark with such force that birds fled the trees. But he wasn't alone. Aya came from the left, rushing at the intruders like a force of nature. She hit the first lion hard, jaws catching fur, claws slashing. She didn't hesitate, didn't wait. Sefu had never seen a lioness fight like that. She wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting him. Kumi lunged in after her. Together, they fought with perfect rhythm, each watching the other's blind side. 2 against 3, and still, the rogue males faltered. but not before one landed a blow. Aya turned to block a flank strike aimed at Kumi. She didn't see the second male coming. His claws raked down her side, tearing skin, muscle, blood. She dropped instantly. Kumi roared like Sefu had never heard before. He tore into the lion who hurt her. The others scattered. They didn't win, because they never expected to face a lion who cared. When the dust cleared, Aya was gone. Not dead. Gone. She'd pulled herself into the brush, out of view, disappeared without a sound. No body, no trail, only blood. Seifu followed. What he could, but it ended near a dry patch of riverbed. No drag marks, no prints. It was like she vanished into the earth itself. The next day, Kumi searched, and the day after, and the next. Until finally, he stopped. Seifu knew then. She hadn't vanished. She'd died, and Kumi had buried her, not to hide her, to honor her, to let her rest. The way she had once let him be more than a predator, and ever since he hadn't touched meat, hadn't roared, hadn't left her side. Because to a lion like Kumi, territory meant nothing if she wasn't there to share it. That wasn't instinct, that was grief. That was memory made muscle. And still, he stayed, not because he didn't know how to move on, but because, in his world, where the wild gives nothing and takes everything, he had once been given her, and she was worth remembering. By the 8th day, the whispers at the station turned into questions. Should we move him? Feed him directly? What if he just dies out there? Seifu listened without interrupting. He stood beside the map, fingers tracing the edge of Kumi's territory, eyes fixed on the spot now marked with a stone and a single word. Aya. They didn't understand yet. This wasn't starvation, from illness. It wasn't weakness. It was mourning. He's not broken, Seifu said finally, his voice steady. He's choosing. A younger ranger scoffed. Choosing not to eat? No, Seifu replied. Choosing to remember. There was a silence. No one wanted to fill. Finally, the chief ranger cleared his throat. You want us to just let him be? I want us to let him feel. Some of them didn't like it. Wild animals weren't supposed to grieve like this. They were supposed to survive, move on, follow instinct. But Kumi wasn't following instinct anymore. He was following love. That night, Seifu returned to the watering hole. He didn't bring food. He didn't bring tools, just a mat, his journal, and a quiet promise not to interfere. Kumi was awake, not moving, just watching. His head rested on his paws, but his eyes followed Seifu's every step. Seifu sat across from him, just outside, the invisible line. He spoke once. I don't know what it's like to lose her, but I know what it's like to lose. The wind stirred. The lion blinked slowly. She's buried well, Seifu added softly. She's still with you, but so are the ones who are still alive. Like you. Kumi didn't respond, but he didn't turn away either. The two of them sat in silence for hours. Man and lion, grief and understanding. A space between species where neither was predator or prey, just two souls carrying weight. The next morning, Seifu returned to the ranger station and told the others what he'd decided. No more food drops, no sedatives, no photos, just presence. We don't fix what isn't broken, he said. We wait, and when he's ready, he'll rise. Not everyone agreed, but no one fought him on it. Later that day, a ranger found Seifu outside, stacking small stones near the perimeter of the watering hole. What's that for? He asked. Respect, Seifu said, setting the last one. And far off, on the edge of the trees, Kumi shifted. Not much, just enough. enough for Sefu to see it, the beginning of return. Because when kindness doesn't push, it gives room for the broken to stand up again. The fire was small, barely a glow beneath the dry kindling. Sefu didn't need warmth. He needed stillness. Kumi was visible in the distance, his silhouette stretched across the ground beside the grave. He hadn't moved since sunset, not to eat, not to drink, but he hadn't turned away either. Sefu sat with his back to a tree, legs crossed, notebook untouched, no notes tonight. Only watching, only waiting. The stars above were quiet and close, the kind of sky that made you forget everything man made, even fear, even time. At some point, a breeze stirred the grass. Sefu shifted slightly and let the silence stretch. He didn't speak to the lion, not at first, not until it felt like the forest was listening too. Then he said, "She's still here, isn't she?" Kumi didn't stir. "She's in the way. You haven't walked away." Still nothing. Sefu glanced down. "I've lost someone too. Not to violence, not to the wild, just to time. And I didn't know how to let go either. I thought if I stayed still long enough, maybe the pain would, too." He looked up again. Kumi's ears flicked, but it didn't. The pain stayed. And so did the love. Stillness. Then movement. Kumi lifted his head, just a little. He didn't stand. He didn't growl, but he looked toward Sefu, for the first time. Not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as something softer. Sefu didn't smile. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging an unspoken truth. He reached beside him and slid a small bundle of meat across the ground, fresh, but placed far from the grave. Then he leaned back again and said nothing more. The moon climbed higher, the wind quieted, and sometime before dawn, Kumi rose. Slowly, cautiously. He didn't walk toward Sefu. He didn't walk toward the meat either. He walked to the stream, bent down, drank. Not out of habit, not out of thirst, but out of decision. Then he turned, paused. His gaze moved from the stone-marked grave to the meat, then, finally, to Sefu. And though the lion said nothing, his eyes held something human, a single message. "I'm still here." He walked toward the food and lay beside it. He didn't eat, not yet, but for the first time in 8 days. He didn't turn his back on it either, and Sefu, heart tight in his chest, whispered, "Thank you," not because the lion had accepted the offering, but because he had chosen life again, quietly, deliberately. One breath at a time. Sefu didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dirt until the sky turned pale, his legs stiff, his eyelids heavy, every part of him aching. But none of that mattered. Because when the light returned, he saw something he hadn't seen in over a week. Kumi chewing. It was slow, mechanical at first, like a creature learning how to eat again. He pulled at the meat cautiously, jaw tight, not devouring it like lions usually do, just tasting it. One bite, then another. Then he stopped, rested his head on his paw, and closed his eyes, not from weakness, but something else. Sefu exhaled for the first time in hours. Not loudly. Just enough for the tension to leave his chest. He didn't get up. He didn't approach. He simply stayed where he was, letting the lion be alone with his grief, with the choice he had just made. Not to forget her, but to go on without her. The other rangers arrived just after sunrise. They slowed their trucks when they spotted Kumi upright, sitting a little taller now, eyes clearer. No one said a word. Even the young ones, usually eager to chatter, fell into a quiet rhythm. They saw it too. He wasn't better, he wasn't healed, but he was coming back, and not because someone fixed him, because someone waited. They left fresh. Meat again, farther from the grave this time, just in case. But Kumi didn't touch it that day. Instead, he drank again, walked a few paces more, marked the edge of a nearby bush. Little things, important things, signs of return, signs of living. Later, that evening, Sefu approached the grave once more. Not close, just near enough to see the stone he'd placed still there, undisturbed. He crouched and whispered, "He's trying." The wind rustled through the leaves, soft and warm. "I think you'd be proud." He stayed a while longer before returning to the station, leaving the lion to his silence. That night, Sefu added one sentence to the end of his report. He chose to eat. He underlined it once. Not because it was dramatic, but because it mattered. Because in a world where survival is usually instinct, Kumi's act wasn't instinctual, it was deliberate. It was love turning toward life, one fragile step at a time. No ceremony, no applause, just a lion with his head against the dirt and a ranger who chose not to fix what was breaking, but to hold space until it found its way back. The cubs appeared on the 10th day. No one saw them arrive. No one knew they were coming. It was just after dawn when a junior ranger, scanning the southern ridge through his binoculars, whispered, There are two." Sefu took the lens without a word, adjusted the focus, stared. Two small shapes stood just beyond the line of shrubs, barely visible through the grass. Cubs, thin, hesitant, but watching. Not crying, not calling, just waiting. His chest tightened. Aya's cubs, they had her face, especially the eyes. Large, curious, steady, and they didn't move toward Kumi. Not yet, they simply observed, like they were waiting for permission to return. Sefu signaled the others not to move. Let them come on their own. The cubs didn't come that day, or the next, but they watched, and so did Kumi. At first, he only glanced their way. Once in the morning, once before lying down. He didn't approach, he didn't growl, but he saw them, and they saw him. Then, on the 3rd day, it happened. The older cub, bolder, braver, stepped out from the tall grass and padded slowly toward the stone that marked their mother's resting place. Kumi didn't move, not when the cub touched it with one paw, not when the younger. One followed. They stood there together, two little lives who had lost their beginning, and looked at the lion who'd stopped living the moment she did. Kumi rose. Sefu tensed, but the lion didn't roar. He walked, step by careful step, until he stood over the cubs. The smaller one flinched, looked up, and Kumi did something no one expected. He lowered his head gently and nuzzled the cub's neck. No force, no sound, just contact. The older cub leaned in, pressed its body to his leg, and Kumi, stayed. He didn't back away. He let them touch him. He let them choose him. Later that day, the three were seen near the stream. Kumi sat in the shade, and the cubs played near his paws. They climbed over his back, chewed his tail, pounced on one another. He let them, and when a jackal came too close, Kumi rose without hesitation and placed himself between the cubs and the danger. Not as a habit, as a father. Sefu watched from a distance, arms crossed over his chest, breath thick in his throat. He didn't take notes that day. There was nothing to record that could match what was unfolding. Grief had brought Kumi to the edge of death, but love had called him back. And now, kindness had given him a reason to stay. Because some things don't need to be rescued, they just need to be waited for. The decision was made quietly. No announcement, no formal meeting, just a shared understanding passed between glances and nods at the ranger station. After witnessing Kumi rise from grief, welcome the cubs, and protect the grave, it was clear to everyone. This place could never be just another part of the map. Seifu was the one who named it, Aya's Rest. It was etched into the tracker logs first, then into the station's permanent records. A small point marked near the bend of the stream, just south of the old acacia tree. But it wasn't just about naming a location. It was about honoring something unseen. What if someone asks why we called it that? A young ranger asked. Seifu looked up from his notes. We tell them it's where a lion lay beside his mate for 7 days and chose love over instinct. Simple. True. They left a single marker stone, no plaque, no sign, just a smooth, white rock placed beneath the acacia, almost identical to the one Kumi had sat beside for over a week. Kumi didn't react when it was placed, but later that afternoon, Seifu watched him pause beside it. He sniffed it once, then sat. The cubs played nearby, tumbling through dust and grass, wrestling like the world had never hurt them. But Kumi, he sat tall, still, present, not guarding anymore, just remembering, and somehow that was even more powerful. Visitors were told to stay back. Rangers kept a respectful distance. No photos, no tourist chatter. This wasn't for them. This was sacred ground, a place where something rare had unfolded, where kindness had been shown to a creature no one thought needed it, where love had not. Only survived, but taught a lion how to become more than a survivor. Kumi hunted again that week, a clean kill, brought it back to the cubs, dropped it beside them, then lay under the tree while they fed. He didn't eat right away. He just watched. Proud, and when the younger one fell asleep with its paw across his, Kumi didn't move. He stayed. Still, a lion. But something more now, too. A guardian, a memory keeper, a father, and Aya's Rest? It wasn't just where she was buried. It was where grief became purpose, where pain became protection, where love didn't end. It simply changed shape. And every time Seifu passed by, he removed his hat. Not because it was required, but because it was deserved. It happened just before sunrise. The cubs were still asleep, curled in a pile near the stone. The morning mist had barely lifted, and the trees held their breath in the half-light. Kumi stood alone on the ridge. Seifu had seen him climb it the night before, slowly, with the grace of a lion who no longer carried the same weight in his chest, but who still remembered every step that brought him there. Now, as light crept across the horizon, Kumi lifted his head and roared. It wasn't a call for dominance. It wasn't the sound of hunger or anger or threat. It was deeper, full, raw, the kind of roar that makes the earth pause, that travels beyond trees and brush, past rivers and wind, into places where no voice had reached before. Seifu froze. He heard it from the far post, binoculars dangling at his chest. Other rangers heard it too. Some stood from their tents. Others stepped out of trucks. Not one of them spoke, because they all knew. This wasn't just any lion roaring, this was Kumi, and it had been 12 days since his last. When the roar ended, the jungle stayed quiet, just for a second, like it needed time to absorb the meaning, and then everything responded. Birds took flight. Monkeys cried from treetops. Even the wind seemed to answer, but it wasn't fear they echoed. It was recognition that something had shifted, that something once broken had not just healed, but had learned to sing again. Seifu climbed the ridge an hour later, not to interfere, just to stand where Kumi had stood. He looked out across the land, his boots planted in the dirt. Below, he saw the cubs playing near the water. One was dragging a stick. The other chased frogs, clumsy and wild. And not far off, Kumi sat, watching. guarding, present. Sefu whispered. She would have been proud. He didn't need to say who, because Kumi's roar had already said it for him, not as a farewell, but as a promise. A vow that Aya hadn't been forgotten, that her cubs would never be alone, that what she gave him, the courage to trust, to feel, to love, was still alive, not buried. Living, roaring. It had been a month since Aya's rest was marked. The jungle had changed in quiet ways. The grass had grown taller near the stone, as if nature itself had chosen to protect what lay beneath. The cubs, no longer frail, wrestled and roamed through the underbrush with the careless joy of youth. Their strength was returning, their confidence, because someone stayed, and that someone was Kumi. He no longer lingered by the grave for hours. He didn't need to. He passed it in the mornings with a slow, respectful nod of his head. Not looking back, not because he'd forgotten, because he remembered enough to keep going. The cubs followed him everywhere now. When he hunted, they watched. When he drank, they copied him. And when he roared, oh, when he roared, they ran toward him, not away. That was trust. Earned, not inherited. Sefu returned one evening, just before sunset, and stood quietly at the edge of the ridge. No camera, no binoculars, just himself. He watched the trio rest near the stream, their reflections bending and dancing across the water's surface. Kumi's body stretched between the cubs, his eyes half closed, his tail flicking lazily. The peace was real, but it had been hard-won. Sefu stepped closer to the stone, the one marking Aya's rest. He crouched, brushed away the dust, whispered a quiet thought he hadn't shared with anyone. Thank you for teaching him. He rose slowly, eyes stinging more than he cared to admit. He didn't need to see her again to know she'd changed everything, because her love hadn't died. It had taught. It had shown that even the fiercest predator can grieve like a father, wait like a partner, love like something far more human than we ever dared believe. It had taught them, too. The rangers no longer doubted animals felt what couldn't be measured, and they no longer doubted that waiting, in the quiet, with compassion, was often the greatest kindness of all. That night, Kumi led the cubs into the trees, not far, not fast, just forward. And as their shapes disappeared into the green, the sound of small paws beside large ones echoed behind them. Not a goodbye. A beginning. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Let it remind you, grief is not weakness, silence is not absence, and kindness is never wasted. Even the wildest hearts carry love, and all they need is space to show it.